Consumer data breaches unfortunately happen like clockwork these days. There's been another massive cyber attack against wireless customers, this time targeting more than tens of millions of T-Mobile users. Consumer rights attorney Abbas Kazaronian joins me now to talk about that. Abbas, first of all, fill us in on the details of this breach. How many of the T-Mobile's customers were actually affected, Abbas, and how exactly did hackers get a hold of this information?
Hi, nice to see you again, Mike. So on approximately August 16th last month, some bad actors, some hackers, if you will, hacked into the networks of T-Mobile and compromised approximately 55 million consumers' data points. And the data that we're talking about includes social security numbers, driver's licenses, names, date of births, and if they used a pay-as-you-go, they also hacked into the PIN numbers. And so this data goes all the way back to the 1990s, and it's a serious issue for T-Mobile and consumers around the country.
Abbas, when did they recognize that they'd been hacked? I mean, this is pretty serious stuff. How long did this go? When did they recognize they'd been hacked?
This is actually very troubling, Mike, because it's reported that T-Mobile didn't actually realize it'd been hacked and there'd been a serious data breach and there's various reports. Some say 24 hours and some say 48 hours after the fact, after the breach had happened, only when on Twitter they realized that this data was on sale on the dark web, so that some bad actors could go buy this data off the dark web from these hackers.
So what's, I'm curious, what's been T-Mobile's response? I mean, such a ridiculous story. I mean, a company this size allow this kind of data breach? What's been T-Mobile's response to all this? And I can't even imagine the sort of liability they face. What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, as far as their response, I mean, they've obviously done what they pretty much have to do, which is that they've offered consumers 2 years of ID theft protection. As far as their liability, they've been fairly kind of, not being very responsive. I'm sure they've been advised by their lawyers not to. But as far as the liability goes, Mike, I think, that's an open-ended question because the state laws differ from every state. But for example, California has statutory damages available of up to $750 per consumer. But what I think is pretty universal is the fact that consumers are entitled to their actual damages. And what that actually means is, if you have to spend time checking your credit reports or calling T-Mobile to see if you were compromised, or any time that you lost, or of course, in the most egregious way, is if your identity actually has been stolen. Some bad actors have set up, credit cards or bought, things on your credit, and that's how you've been damaged. You're entitled to do that. And furthermore, T-Mobile has an arbitration agreement, which I know you have documented, and why it's bad for consumers, on your show many, many times. But we can use it as a sword here. What the arbitration and the contract with T-Mobile says is that they have to pay the cost of arbitration, and if the consumer prevails, which I'm sure most victims will, they're entitled to all their attorney's fees. But if T-Mobile wins, they're not entitled to their attorney's fees. So that is what's available to consumers, and that is the only silver lining I see in all of this.
Yeah, the backstory to me, Abbas, is interesting. This kid, John Aaron Benz, says that the CIA took him prisoner and tortured him and held him prisoner, and that this is his payback. And now the question is, how much of this has he put on the dark web? Of course, the CIA says, no, we don't know the kid. We didn't have anything to do with it. But he sued, this Benz has sued the government because he said, look, this is my payback. This is what you did to me. You abducted me, you tortured me, and now you know what? I'm going to get even. Well, the story sounds just so bizarre, but it appears to be true. He's brought a lawsuit. When you read the lawsuit, it sounds like it is the absolute truth.
Well, I mean, if someone's brought a lawsuit on his behalf, they have, what we call Rule 11 obligations to do a due diligence to make sure you're not bringing a sham pleading or, bringing a case, in fraud, if you like. However, the CIA is not going to admit to, its torture techniques and whether it has or has not been torturing any individual. So, we can't take that with, with a straight face. But what I can tell you is, I think the most upsetting part for consumers is that they don't know where their data is. And if it's on the dark web, it's there for perpetuity potentially, and we don't know who has it and for how long they have it. And I think it's that insecurity that is so troubling to American consumers.
Abbas, I'm glad you're working this case. I don't think there is a better lawyer in America to handle a case like this, and I'm glad you're out there doing that. Thank you for joining us, okay?
Thank you, Mike. I really appreciate you having me.